I'm going to take a step back today, and I want to talk about this term archetypes, which you might have heard about in a psychology class. Maybe you've heard about it in religion classes or in other presentations before. But we're going to begin by talking about archetypes because I think Judaism is a perfect avenue to that discussion. And then you can see how these archetypes exist in other religions as well. I've already kind of talked about archetypes in that I've pointed out that Jesus of Nazareth, Muhammad of Mecca, Siddhartha Gautama of India, and Moses of Egypt and later of Israel, that they all were about the same age when they had their religious experiences. And so there's something to be said about this journey through faith, almost like a midlife crisis, but in a spiritual sense. And we see this as a common pattern, probably Abram of Ur, and Zoroaster as well. And so if you think about the idea of the journey, like there's something primordial, archetypical, if you will. In fact, I should probably take another step back and just define archetypes. Archetypes are universal symbols. And when I say symbol, I don't mean just a picture. I mean symbol as a boiling down of an eternal essence. That there are universal symbols that we all recognize. It could be colors, black and white. And if you watch a movie and you see a character wearing white, you kind of subconsciously know that they're going to be the good guy. And conversely, if somebody's wearing a mask or if somebody's wearing black, they're going to be most often the bad guy. What Hollywood is doing is they're tapping into universal archetypes. But it can also become a catch-22, because of course, if a particular director in Hollywood started reversing that would leak its way into the collective consciousness, or as Carl Jung would say, the unconsciousness of the human spirit. So when we look at, say, the story of Moses, or we look at the story of Gilgamesh, or we look at the story of the Monkey King, or we look at the story of Abram of Ur, there are patterns in these stories that I would suggest to you, as Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell would say to you, that we're always retelling this universal story. Gilgamesh is the oldest that we know of in this area. And in many ways, Moses and Jesus of Nazareth are modeled after Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh was threatened at birth. Moses was threatened at birth. Jesus, in one of the gospel narratives, was threatened at birth. The case of both Gilgamesh and Moses, they were put in a river to escape. In the case of Jesus, he was sent to Egypt to escape in that gospel narrative. And it's almost Herculean, too, if you want to bring in some Greco mythology as well. But I would challenge you that that's what we watch in our movies. If you think about Harry Potter, Wolverine, Luke Skywalker, Superman, Lord of the Rings, these are all telling the archetypical story of the hero and of the journey. That in all of these cases, the person is threatened at birth. In all of these cases, or many of them, they wind up with an adopted family that hides them and protects them. They get invited into a mystery, and then they combat their inner fears while combating an external foe, and ultimately are successful. Joseph Campbell wrote a book called The Hero of a Thousand Faces, and that's what he says. That he says that the hero's journey is the special birth, life threatened, exile and or hidden identity, an invitation that's often rejected at first and ultimately the hero accepts. And then I've used this expression before in our conversations, dark night of the soul. Dark night of the soul is a theological as well as a literary term which describes doubt, essentially. So if you grew up in a Judeo-Christian tradition, when Moses flees Egypt and becomes a shepherd, that's him is rejecting his path, and he doubts. Probably a more crystallized example would be Jesus of Nazareth when he is tempted by the devil and he's doubting whether he should take up his ministry, or maybe even the night before he is executed when he says, "Let this cup pass me by." And when Muhammad of Mecca had his dark night of the soul, the angels brought him to Jerusalem so he could see what he should be doing. He returned and then continued his mission. That very often, and this is a very dharmic term, this death of self, that again, I've said before, I think the people of the dharmic religions understand the need for the self to die more than Westerners. In Western theology, it really seems to be reserved for the special people, the saints, the holy people, the heroes. But the dharmic people in dharmic religions understand that we all have to have a death of self before we can truly master ourselves and become one with the universe. And then once we allow for the death of self, probably the best example of this would be in Harry Potter, in the last Harry Potter movie and book, where he literally dies and he has that confrontation with himself, that confrontation with himself through the metaphorical conversation that he has with his mentor. And then he returns, right? He returns, and just as Luke Skywalker returns, and they're more powerful and they take on the evil and they're able to be victorious over evil because they've allowed the self to die and they have become one with the universe. This is the archetype of the hero. It's all throughout religious literature and as well as literary literature and film and entertainment. Again, it is based on the work of Carl Jung and this idea of archetypes and universal truths. And I would even say that in the Judeo-Christian tradition in particular, but universally as well, you can see certain numbers have power. That in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the numbers 3, 7, 12, and 40 are powerful numbers. And that's why then, even in secular Western culture, you see those same numbers, 3, 7, 12, and 40 pop up over and over and over again. Like, as if I've had you in a history class, I've probably told you there's no such thing as the 7 seas or the 7 continents. We call them the 7 seas and we call them the 7 continents because we want there to be 7, because 7 is an important number in the Judeo-Christian tradition. We're looking for it, we're creating it, not seeing what's actually there.